It was a beautiful day, one of those crisp mornings that promises a perfect celebration. I had polished my shoes, donned my best suit, and even added a small boutonniere Karen insisted matched her sister Lisa's wedding theme. This was a big day for her family, and while I wasn't particularly close to Lisa, I was there to support Karen. When I arrived at the grand venue, a sprawling estate buzzing with guests dressed to impress, my excitement was tempered by a creeping unease. I was proud to stand beside Karen, even if her family treated me like an outsider more often than not. Today, I told myself, was about celebrating love. I approached the entrance confidently, nodding to the security guard at the door as I handed over my invitation. He glanced at it, then at me, and frowned. "Your name isn't on the list," he said flatly. I blinked. "That can't be right. I'm Thomas Reed. I'm Karen's husband." The guard's face didn't change. "I'm sorry, sir. I can't let you in. You'll need to step aside." At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe Karen had accidentally forgotten to confirm my attendance. Maybe it was some clerical error. But then I saw her, standing a few feet away with her mother, Vivian. They weren't rushing to explain the misunderstanding or vouch for me. Instead, they were laughing. The sight hit me harder than I expected. Karen, the woman I had promised to love and support, stood with a hand over her mouth, trying to stifle a giggle. Vivian didn't bother to hide her amusement, her head thrown back in a loud laugh. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. My throat tightened as I glanced at the other guests milling around, some watching the scene unfold. Whispers started to ripple through the crowd, and a few phones were raised, capturing this humiliating moment for posterity. I could feel my pulse in my ears, a dull roar drowning out the world around me. I wanted to shout, to demand an explanation, but I knew that would only give Karen and Vivian exactly what they wanted. More humiliation for me, their convenient scapegoat. So, I did the only thing I could. I straightened my shoulders, nodded to the security guard, and walked away. The drive home was a blur. My thoughts raced, replaying the moment over and over. How had it come to this? Karen and I weren't perfect, but I thought we were partners. Yet, this felt like something deeper. A deliberate attempt to degrade me, to show me that in her world, I was expendable. I parked the car and sat in silence, staring at the dashboard. My reflection in the rearview mirror looked foreign, stoic on the outside, but beneath that calm facade, a storm was brewing. I had been ignored before, brushed aside at family gatherings, and treated like an accessory at social events. But this was different. This was public, calculated, and cruel. Later that evening, Karen came home, the faint scent of champagne and roses clinging to her. She didn't seem surprised to see me sitting on the couch. "You didn't stay for the ceremony?" she asked, feigning innocence. I looked at her, searching for any sign of remorse, but all I saw was indifference. "You knew I wasn't on the list," I said evenly. She shrugged, her tone dismissive. "Mom thought it would be best to keep things simple. Lisa wanted an exclusive guest list. You understand, right?" I didn't respond. What was there to say? That night, as Karen slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The laughter, the whispers, the humiliation. It all replayed in my mind like a cruel loop. Something had shifted. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about respect. Respect I realized Karen and her family had never truly given me. I promised myself that I wouldn't forget this moment. It wasn't just a rejection from a wedding. It was a rejection of me as a person, as a partner. And while I didn't know it yet, this was the beginning of the end. The days after Lisa's wedding were a haze of frustration and reflection. The humiliation I endured at the hands of Karen and her mother, Vivian, replayed in my mind constantly. But instead of an apology, Karen carried on as though nothing had happened. In fact, it seemed like the wedding had only added fuel to her social media frenzy. My wife was obsessed with curating an image of perfection, a glamorous, enviable lifestyle that was far removed from reality. Karen's days were consumed with uploading perfectly staged photos, showcasing high-end restaurants, designer clothes, and luxury events. Meanwhile, I was working long hours as a project manager, building a stable, honest career. I didn't mind that Karen came from a wealthier background, or that her family enjoyed luxuries I never could. What stung was her complete disregard for the sacrifices I made to support her lifestyle. I'd often come home from work to find her lounging in the living room, scrolling through her phone, her laptop open with online shopping tabs. Packages arrived daily, each one containing something new and expensive: shoes, handbags, jewelry. I'd ask, "How was your day?" She'd wave me off, barely looking up. "Fine." Lisa and I went shopping. Every conversation felt like a transaction, devoid of any real connection. One night, while I was reviewing project reports in my home office, I overheard Karen talking to her mother on the phone. "Thomas just doesn't get it," she said, her voice filled with irritation. "He thinks budgeting means saying no to a new pair of shoes. It's embarrassing." Vivian's response was muffled, but I caught the words "beneath us" and "just a phase." A phase? I clenched my fists, the sting of their words cutting deep. Was that how they saw me? As some temporary inconvenience, someone to tolerate until they could move on to something better? Their attitude toward me was reflected in the lavish events they attended. From charity galas to exclusive brunches, Karen and Vivian were regular fixtures in the city's elite social scene. I was rarely invited, and when I was, it was clear they preferred me to stay quiet and blend into the background. The few times I tried to engage, Vivian would cut me off with a patronizing comment, or Karen would steer the conversation back to herself. It was as though my accomplishments, my opinions, my very presence were an afterthought. I began noticing the stark contrast between our lives more acutely. Karen's Instagram feed was a highlight reel of extravagance. Her posing in designer gowns, sipping champagne with Lisa, and flashing diamond earrings that I hadn't bought her. Meanwhile, my own life was practical, grounded. I paid bills, planned for our future, and handled the day-to-day responsibilities that kept everything running smoothly. But none of that mattered to Karen. What mattered was appearances. One evening, after Karen had gone to bed, I scrolled through her social media out of curiosity. It was all there, the perfect facade. Caption after caption painted a picture of a flawless, glamorous life. Grateful for this amazing family and all the blessings in life. My face wasn't in a single photo. Not one mention of me or my role in making those blessings possible. Instead, it was Lisa, Vivian, and Karen, smiling at fancy restaurants or lounging on pristine beaches, the captions dripping with self-satisfaction. The breaking point came when I stumbled across a video from Lisa's wedding. It had been uploaded by one of Karen's friends. The video showed me standing at the entrance of the venue, arguing with the security guard. The camera zoomed in on my confused expression as Karen and Vivian laughed in the background. The caption read, "When you don't belong at the VIP table, face with tears of joy, #awkward moments." My blood boiled. This wasn't just neglect or indifference. This was intentional, public humiliation. I closed my laptop and sat in silence, the weight of it all pressing down on me. Karen and I had once dreamed of building a life together, but now, it felt like I was a mere footnote in her pursuit of social validation. The contrast between our worlds was glaring, and for the first time, I realized just how far apart we had grown. I wasn't angry about her wealth or her family's affluence. I was angry that I had been reduced to a joke, a pawn in her quest for appearances. As I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, a thought occurred to me. How long could I keep living like this? Tension had a way of creeping into my marriage with Karen, slowly but relentlessly, until it became the defining feature of our lives. The more time passed, the more I noticed the distance between us. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, intellectual, and even spiritual. Karen's obsession with maintaining her social status became all-consuming. Her days revolved around glamorous outings, orchestrated photo shoots, and endless conversations with her mother, Vivian, about the latest trends and upcoming events. And then, there was me, the husband who didn't quite fit into her picture-perfect world. It wasn't always like this. I remembered a time when Karen and I laughed together, dreamed together, and talked about building a life that was ours. But those days felt like a distant memory. Now, I found myself watching from the sidelines as she played a starring role in a life I didn't recognize. The tension came to a head one evening when Karen announced, casually and without preamble, that Lisa's wedding would be the event of the year. "It's going to be incredible," she said, scrolling through her phone as she reclined on the couch. Lisa's pulled out all the stops: celebrity chef, live orchestra, the works. I nodded, trying to engage. "Sounds impressive. Are we doing anything to help with the preparations?" Karen barely looked up. "Oh, Lisa's got it covered. Besides, you wouldn't really be involved in the planning. It's more of a family thing." I frowned. I thought I was family. Karen waved her hand dismissively. "You know what I mean." Her words stung more than I cared to admit. That was the thing about Karen. She didn't always need to say something outright to make her feelings clear. To her, I wasn't really part of her family. I was a convenient accessory, someone to pay the bills and provide stability while she pursued her curated version of perfection. As the wedding day approached, the cracks in our relationship became impossible to ignore. Karen spent hours on the phone with Vivian and Lisa, discussing every detail of the event. The guest list, the decorations, the menu. It was all carefully orchestrated to impress. I was rarely included in these conversations. When I tried to join in, Karen would brush me off with a quick, "Don't worry about it," or "This isn't really your thing." It wasn't just the wedding that caused tension. Karen's social media presence had become a point of contention as well. One evening, I glanced at her phone as she posted yet another picture of herself in a designer dress. The caption read, "Grateful for this fabulous life and the amazing people who make it possible." Amazing people? I couldn't help but wonder if I even made the list. The distance between us grew wider with each passing day. Conversations became strained, our shared laughter a distant memory. I felt like I was living with a stranger, someone more concerned with likes and comments than the man she had married. The final straw came during a family dinner a week before the wedding. Vivian was holding court, as usual, regaling everyone with tales of Lisa's extravagant plans. "This wedding is going to be talked about for years," she said with a self-satisfied smile. "It's a real family affair." I raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't seem like I've been involved much in this family affair." The table went silent for a moment before Vivian laughed. "Oh, Thomas, don't take it personally. This is Lisa's day. You're more of a behind-the-scenes kind of guy." Behind the scenes. Karen chuckled along with her mother, and I felt my stomach twist. It wasn't just what they said. It was the way they said it, as though I didn't belong. That night, Karen and I argued for the first time in months. "Why do you let them treat me like this?" I demanded, my voice shaking with frustration. "Like what?" Karen shot back. "They don't mean anything by it. You're just overreacting." "Overreacting?" I said, incredulous. "Karen, I'm your husband. I should feel like I'm part of your life, not some outsider." She sighed, exasperated. "You're making this into a bigger deal than it needs to be. Can't you just let it go?" Let it go. I didn't say anything else that night. What was the point? Karen had made it clear where her priorities lay, and I wasn't one of them. The tension between us was no longer something I could ignore. It had become the defining feature of our marriage, a constant, unspoken presence that colored every interaction. And as Lisa's wedding drew closer, I couldn't shake the feeling that things were about to reach a breaking point. The day of Lisa's wedding had finally arrived. It was all anyone in Karen's family could talk about for weeks. The high-profile guest list, the glamorous venue, the endless luxuries that only someone with Vivian's influence could orchestrate. For Karen, this was more than a family celebration. It was a chance to flaunt her status, to step into the spotlight and bask in the admiration of the elite. For me, it was something entirely different. I dressed carefully that morning, pulling on the tailored suit Karen had picked out for me months earlier. The memory stung now, as I realized it was more about how I'd look in photos than any actual consideration for me. Karen was already gone by the time I finished getting ready. She left early to help Lisa with last-minute preparations, though help likely meant sipping champagne and posing for pre-ceremony pictures. I followed behind in my car, my nerves building with each mile. After the tension of the past few weeks, I hoped that being present at the wedding might help bridge the growing gap between Karen and me. When I arrived at the venue, it was every bit as opulent as expected. A sprawling estate with manicured gardens, fountains glistening in the sunlight, and valets darting between luxury cars. Guests in designer dresses and tailored suits milled about, their laughter and chatter filling the air. I approached the entrance, where a stern-looking security guard stood with a clipboard. "Name?" he asked curtly. "Thomas Reed," I replied, offering a polite smile. The guard scanned his list, his brow furrowing. "You're not on here." For a moment, I thought he must have made a mistake. "That can't be right," I said. "I'm Karen's husband. I was invited." The guard's expression didn't change. "Your name isn't on the list. I can't let you in." I glanced around, searching for Karen or anyone who might vouch for me. That's when I saw them. Karen and Vivian standing a few yards away, watching the exchange with thinly veiled amusement. Karen turned to her mother and said something, and they both laughed. My stomach dropped. This wasn't a mistake. This was intentional. I tried to reason with the guard one last time. "Please, can you check again? This has to be an error." But his tone remained firm. "I'm sorry, sir. You need to step aside." As I moved away from the entrance, the reality of the situation hit me like a punch to the gut. Karen and Vivian had orchestrated this humiliation, reducing me to a spectacle for their amusement. To make matters worse, I noticed several guests looking in my direction, their whispers and sidelong glances making my humiliation complete. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a notification from social media, curious and dreading it at the same time. I opened the app to find a live stream. The video was clear. Me standing awkwardly at the entrance, the guard denying me entry, and Karen in the background, laughing. The caption read, "When you don't make the VIP list. Face with tears of joy #awkward husband moments." My heart raced as I stared at the screen, my face heating with anger and shame. They hadn't just humiliated me in front of their friends and family. They had broadcasted it to the world. I turned and walked back to my car, each step heavier than the last. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly as I drove away, my mind swirling with a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. How had it come to this? How had I gone from being Karen's partner, her confidant, to the butt of her jokes? That evening, Karen came home late, still glowing from the success of the event. "Why did you leave?" she asked casually, as though nothing had happened. "You know why," I replied, my voice colder than I intended. She shrugged, completely unfazed. "It's just a bit of fun, Thomas. Don't take everything so seriously." I stared at her, searching for some trace of guilt or remorse, but there was none. She didn't care. Not about the humiliation, not about my feelings, not about us. That night, I lay awake, replaying the day's events in my mind. The laughter, the whispers, the live stream. It all felt like a cruel joke at my expense. But more than that, it felt like a turning point. This wasn't just about the wedding. It was about respect, or rather, the lack of it. Karen and her family had shown me exactly how they saw me, and it was a truth I couldn't ignore. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. Something had to change. The morning after the wedding humiliation, I woke up to the relentless buzzing of my phone. At first, I thought it might be work, but as I unlocked the screen, my heart sank. Social media notifications flooded in, tags, comments, and messages, all stemming from that live stream. Karen's fun, at my expense, had gone viral. Strangers I'd never met weighed in on my life, turning my humiliation into their entertainment. I scrolled through the comments, each one more cutting than the last. Imagine being so pathetic your own wife doesn't want you at the wedding. This guy seriously thought he was VIP material? Face with tears of joy. Karen deserves better. My chest tightened as I read them, the words cutting deeper than I expected. I wasn't just embarrassed anymore. I was furious. Karen had crossed a line, and now I was left to face the fallout. When Karen came downstairs, she was her usual self, calm, composed, and completely unaware of the storm she'd unleashed. "Morning," she said breezily, scrolling through her phone as she sipped her coffee. "Morning," I replied, my voice clipped. She didn't notice my tone, too absorbed in her social media feed. That was, until she came across the comments. "Oh," she muttered, her expression shifting ever so slightly. "People can be so mean online." I stared at her, incredulous. "Mean? Karen, they're mocking me because of what you and your mother did yesterday. She looked up, feigning innocence. What are you talking about? The live stream. The comments. The whole scene you orchestrated at the wedding, I said, my voice rising. Do you even realize how humiliating that was for me? Karen rolled her eyes. Oh, come on, Thomas. It was a joke. People are just overreacting. A joke? I repeated, my anger boiling over. You publicly humiliated your husband. How is that a joke? Karen sighed, clearly annoyed. You're being dramatic. If you can't handle a little harmless fun, that's on you. I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my composure. It was clear Karen didn't see, or didn't care about, the damage she had done. Harmless fun, I said, my voice steady but cold. You've turned me into a joke, Karen, and now I'm the one who has to deal with the fallout. She didn't respond, instead turning back to her phone. The backlash wasn't limited to strangers online. At work, my colleagues tiptoed around me, their awkward smiles and hushed whispers confirming they'd seen the video. During a meeting, one of them made a passing comment, trying to lighten the mood. Hey, Thomas, maybe you should try getting on the guest list next time, huh? The room erupted in laughter, but I sat there, stone-faced. It wasn't just the jokes, it was the pity in their eyes. Everyone saw me as the man whose wife didn't respect him, and it hurt more than I cared to admit. At home, things weren't any better. Karen continued to post her curated version of life online, ignoring the growing tension between us. She acted as though nothing had happened, brushing off any attempt I made to address the situation. But the worst part was the silence from her family. Vivian, who had been so vocal in orchestrating the wedding, had nothing to say about the fallout. It was as though they had washed their hands of me entirely. As the days passed, the online harassment only intensified. Karen's followers latched onto the narrative she had created, painting me as the unworthy husband who didn't belong in her glamorous world. I started receiving private messages, some taunting, others offering unsolicited advice. Maybe you should step up your game if you want to keep a woman like Karen. She deserves someone who can match her lifestyle. Each message was a reminder of how far things had spiraled out of control. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, scrolling through the relentless barrage of comments, I realized something had to change. Karen's disregard for my feelings wasn't just a problem. It was the problem. For years, I had put up with her family's condescension and her obsession with appearances, convincing myself it would get better. But this wasn't something I could fix. Karen didn't respect me, and without respect, there was nothing left to salvage. The next morning, I made a decision. When Karen came downstairs, I handed her the laptop, open to a page full of comments from her followers. Read these, I said, my tone firm. She glanced at the screen, her expression unreadable. This is what your harmless fun has done, I continued. You've made me a target, Karen. And for what? To entertain your audience? She looked at me, for once at a loss for words. I'm done, I said simply. I won't be part of this anymore. I left the house that day with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. For the first time, I realized I didn't need Karen's approval, or her family's, for validation. The backlash had been painful, but it had also been eye-opening. It was time to reclaim my dignity and focus on what truly mattered, rebuilding my life on my terms. The morning after my declaration, the house felt unusually quiet. Karen hadn't said much when I walked out the door the previous day, and I suspected she was still trying to process the situation. For once, I didn't care what she thought. My mind was focused on one thing, moving forward without her chaos weighing me down. But just as I was settling into the idea of reclaiming my peace, everything began to unravel, for Karen and her family. It started with a knock on my office door during lunch. Jeff, one of my coworkers, peeked in with a hesitant expression. Hey, Thomas, have you seen this? He asked, sliding his phone across the desk. I looked down to see an article on a local gossip blog. The headline read, Reed Wedding Fallout, Behind the Scenes of a Social Media Disaster. My stomach twisted as I skimmed the article. It wasn't just about the wedding. It was a full expose on Karen's family, detailing their superficiality and the facade they had built over the years. Apparently, The wedding fiasco had caught the attention of a journalist who dug deeper into their lives. The article revealed how Vivian and Lisa had inflated their social status by exaggerating wealth, relying on loans and credit cards to maintain appearances. Karen wasn't spared either. Her social media posts were dissected, exposing the stark contrast between her curated life and reality. I should have felt vindicated, but instead, I felt nothing. It was a hollow victory, watching their carefully constructed world crumble under the weight of their lies. Later that evening, I returned home to find Karen and Vivian in the living room. Vivian's usual confidence was gone, replaced by a look of desperation. Karen's face was streaked with tears, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. "We need to talk," Karen said, her voice trembling. I stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "About what?" Vivian jumped in, her tone frantic. "This article is ruining us, Thomas. Everyone's talking about it. Lisa's sponsorship deals are falling through, and people are canceling collaborations with Karen. The wedding fallout has become a PR nightmare." I raised an eyebrow. "And what does this have to do with me?" Karen stepped forward, her voice cracking. "Thomas, please. You're good at damage control. You can help us fix this." I couldn't help but laugh. "Fix this? Karen, you and your family have spent years treating me like an afterthought. You humiliated me in front of your friends, your family, and the entire internet. And now you want my help?" Vivian interjected, her tone sharp. "We didn't mean for it to go this far. It was all just miscommunication." "Miscommunication?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You orchestrated my public humiliation. That wasn't a miscommunication. It was deliberate." Karen broke down, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake, okay? I didn't think it would end like this. I didn't think." "You didn't think," I interrupted. "That's the problem, Karen. You never thought about how your actions would affect me. And now that your perfect little world is falling apart, you expect me to clean up your mess." She opened her mouth to respond but stopped, realizing there was nothing she could say to justify her actions. The fallout extended beyond their social circles. Vivian revealed that creditors were calling, demanding repayment for the loans used to fund Lisa's extravagant wedding. The vendors were threatening lawsuits after not receiving full payment. "Thomas," Vivian pleaded, "you have connections. You could talk to them, negotiate something." I shook my head. "No, Vivian. You and your family made this mess, and you'll have to deal with the consequences. I'm done being the person you walk all over whenever it's convenient." The desperation in the room was palpable. Karen looked at me, her expression a mix of regret and helplessness. "I'll do better," she said softly. "I'll make this right. Please, just don't give up on us." I stared at her, searching for sincerity in her words. But all I saw was someone grasping at straws, trying to salvage a life that had already fallen apart. "I gave you everything, Karen," I said, my voice steady. "My support, my loyalty, my love. And you threw it all away. I'm not giving up on us. You already did." That night, I packed a small bag and left the house. I didn't slam the door or make a scene. I simply walked away, leaving Karen and Vivian to deal with the wreckage they had created. As I drove to a hotel, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by their expectations or their toxic behavior. The fallout from the wedding had exposed the truth about Karen and her family, and it was clear they were more concerned with saving face than making amends. But I wasn't their scapegoat anymore. I thought I had seen the worst of it. The humiliation at the wedding, the social media fallout, and Karen's hollow apologies were enough to make me believe that nothing else could shock me. But as I moved forward, trying to put distance between myself and her family's chaos, I stumbled upon truths that made everything I'd endured seem like the tip of the iceberg. It started with an unexpected phone call. "Thomas," a voice said hesitantly, "this is Melissa, Lisa's former event planner." I frowned. "Former?" "Yes," she sighed. "I resigned after the wedding fiasco, but I wanted to reach out because, well, you deserve to know what really went on behind the scenes." I gripped the phone tighter. "Go on." Melissa proceeded to unravel a tangled web of deceit and manipulation. She told me about the lavish expenses for Lisa's wedding, expenses that Karen and Vivian had justified as necessary to maintain their image. But what struck me most was how these expenses were funded. The money didn't come from Vivian, Melissa revealed. Karen borrowed against your joint accounts. She didn't tell you? My stomach churned. Karen had drained our savings to fund a spectacle that I wasn't even allowed to attend. The more Melissa shared, the clearer the picture became. Karen and Vivian had been living beyond their means for years, using loans, credit cards, and shady financial maneuvers to maintain their illusion of wealth. But what really made my blood boil was Melissa's next revelation. I overheard something during the wedding preparations, she said, her voice hesitant. Karen and Vivian were laughing about you. They said you were too simple to understand how money worked and that you'd never notice if they used your funds. Her words hit me like a freight train. That evening, I returned to the house, not to reconcile, but to confront Karen and demand answers. She was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone as if nothing had happened. Vivian wasn't there, and for that, I was grateful. We need to talk, I said, my voice cold. Karen looked up, surprised by my tone. What's wrong now? I threw the bank statements on the table in front of her. Care to explain this? She glanced at the papers, her face paling as realization set in. Thomas, I can. Don't, I snapped. Don't lie to me. Melissa already told me everything. You drained our accounts to fund your sister's wedding, and you thought I wouldn't notice? Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. It wasn't like that, she stammered. We were going to pay it back. You know how important appearances are to my family. Appearances? I said, incredulous. You sacrificed our future for appearances? Do you even hear yourself? She stood, her voice rising. You don't understand what it's like, Thomas. My family has expectations, and I had to meet them. You've always been content with your modest life, but I couldn't live like that. Her words stung, but they also confirmed what I had suspected for years. Karen didn't see me as an equal partner. To her, I was a means to an end, a convenient provider who could be discarded when I no longer served her purpose. You used me, I said quietly. Not just my money, but my trust, my love, everything. And for what? To impress people who don't even care about you? Karen's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. The final blow came when I confronted her about the live stream and her mother's involvement. Was humiliating me at the wedding part of your grand plan too? I demanded. She hesitated, which was all the confirmation I needed. It wasn't personal, she said weakly. It was just fun. People like that kind of drama. I shook my head in disbelief. You humiliated your husband for social media clout. Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds? Karen broke down, sobbing. I didn't mean for things to get this bad. I was just trying to keep up, to make things work. Her tears might have moved me once, but not anymore. I don't care about your excuses, Karen, I said firmly. You betrayed me, and you betrayed this marriage. There's nothing left to salvage. She looked up at me, desperation etched on her face. So that's it? You're just giving up? No, I said, my voice steady. You gave up on us the moment you chose your family's image over our relationship. I'm just accepting it. I packed the last of my things that night, determined not to look back. As I drove away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, relief. The betrayal had cut deep, but it had also given me clarity. Karen's actions had shown me who she truly was, and I refused to let her drag me down any further. It was time to start over, free from her lies and manipulation. It was almost a week after I left when Karen reached out to me. The silence had been deafening on her end. No texts, no calls, until my phone buzzed with her name on the screen. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something in me decided to pick up. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant. Thomas, can we talk? I sighed, leaning back in my chair. What do you want, Karen? She hesitated. I want to apologize. For everything. Part of me wanted to hang up right there, to shield myself from whatever manipulative tactics she might use next. But the other part of me, perhaps the part that once loved her deeply, wanted to hear what she had to say. Go on, I said curtly. I messed up, she began. I let my family's expectations get in the way of what really mattered. I hurt you, Thomas, and I don't even know how to begin making it right. Her voice cracked, and for a brief second, I thought she might actually be sincere. Is this about the money, Karen? I asked, cutting straight to the point. Or is it about your reputation falling apart now that everyone knows the truth? There was a pause. It's not about the money, she said quietly. It's about us. About how I took you for granted. How I let myself get so caught up in appearances that I lost sight of what we had. What we had. I repeated, incredulous. Karen, you didn't just take me for granted. You humiliated me, lied to me, and used me. Do you even understand the damage you've done? Her tears came in earnest then, her sobs barely contained. I know, Thomas. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I can't believe how far I let things go. I've lost everything, and it's my fault. Her words hung in the air, heavy with regret, but I couldn't let myself soften. Not yet. Karen, do you even understand what forgiveness means? I asked. It's not just about saying you're sorry and expecting everything to go back to normal. It's about taking responsibility for your actions, about actually making changes. And from where I'm standing, all I see is someone who's sorry because they got caught. She was silent for a long moment, and I could hear her steadying her breathing. You're right, she admitted. I haven't earned your forgiveness. And maybe I never will. But I need you to know that I'm going to try. I'm going to make things right, even if it's too late for us. For the first time, her words felt genuine. But that didn't mean I was ready to let her back into my life. Karen, I said, my tone softening slightly, I appreciate the apology. I really do. But you need to understand that this isn't something you can fix with words. You broke my trust, and that's not something I can easily get back. I know, she whispered. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I sighed, feeling a twinge of sadness despite my resolve. I hope you mean that, Karen. I really do. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back to the way things were. It means moving forward, separately. After I ended the call, I sat in silence, reflecting on everything that had led to this point. Karen's apology had felt sincere, but sincerity wasn't enough. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with the consequences. For me, the apology wasn't closure. It was confirmation that walking away had been the right decision. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months. Karen's apology, while appreciated, didn't change the fact that I had a new life to build. A life free from manipulation, humiliation, and toxic relationships. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful about the future. The day after Karen's apology, I felt a strange sense of peace. Not because her words had magically mended everything, but because I knew I was no longer tethered to her chaos. The weight of her manipulation and my constant attempts to hold our marriage together were gone, and in its place was a quiet clarity. For the first time in years, I focused solely on myself. I started small, tackling the things I had neglected in the wake of our crumbling relationship. My apartment, a temporary refuge after leaving the house, was bare and impersonal, but I began making it my own. A few framed photos, a comfortable couch, and a new coffee maker were simple additions, but they felt like steps toward rebuilding a life that was mine. Work became my sanctuary. As a project manager, I thrived on structure and progress, and throwing myself into my career helped me regain a sense of control. My coworkers, once hesitant to approach me after the wedding debacle, started treating me with a newfound respect. Maybe it was because I carried myself differently, no longer weighed down by Karen's dismissive comments or Vivian's judgmental stares. One afternoon, Jeff, the coworker who had shown me the article about Karen's family, stopped by my office. "Hey, Thomas," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "You seem different lately. Happier, maybe?" I smiled. "I guess you could say I've been doing some spring cleaning, clearing out the toxic stuff in my life." Jeff nodded, grinning. "Good for you, man. You deserve it." His words, though simple, resonated. For so long, I had felt like I was drowning in a sea of other people's expectations. Now, I was finally breathing again. I also began reconnecting with old friends, people I had lost touch with during my marriage. Karen had always discouraged me from maintaining those relationships, dismissing my friends as too ordinary for her taste. One evening, I met up with an old college buddy, Marcus, at a local bar. "You look good, man," Marcus said, clapping me on the shoulder. "Better than the last time I saw you." "Thanks," I replied, sipping my beer. "It's amazing what leaving a toxic situation can do for your sanity." Marcus chuckled. "Well, here's to new beginnings." We raised our glasses, the clink of the toast feeling like a symbolic moment. As the weeks turned into months, I noticed more changes, not just in my surroundings, but in myself. I started running again, something I hadn't done since Karen dismissed it as a hobby for people who can't afford gym memberships. The rhythmic pounding of my feet on the pavement became a form of therapy, a way to process everything I had been through. I also rediscovered my love for photography, dusting off my old camera and venturing out to capture sunsets, cityscapes, and candid moments of life around me. Each photo felt like a snapshot of my journey, proof that I was moving forward, one step at a time. Karen reached out a few more times during those months. Her messages ranged from apologetic to accusatory, depending on her mood. Sometimes she would beg for another chance, claiming she had changed. Other times, she would lash out, accusing me of abandoning her and refusing to take responsibility for her actions. I didn't respond to most of her messages. When I did, it was brief and to the point. "We're done, Karen. I wish you the best, but I'm moving on." The final message came one morning in early spring. "I hope you find happiness, Thomas," she wrote. "I'm sorry for everything." This time, I didn't feel the need to reply. Moving forward wasn't just about cutting ties with Karen. It was about redefining what I wanted for myself. I set new goals for my career, taking on more challenging projects and earning recognition for my leadership. I started traveling, visiting places I had always dreamed of but never prioritized. In the process, I met new people who valued me for who I was, not for the image I projected. One of those people was Clara, a photographer I met during a local art exhibit. She was vibrant, down-to-earth, and completely uninterested in social media clout or superficial appearances. Our connection was easy, unforced. Over coffee one evening, she asked me about my past. I hesitated, unsure how much to share, but her genuine curiosity made me feel safe. "I've been through some interesting times," I said, smiling wryly. She laughed. "Haven't we all? The important thing is where you are now." Where I was now, I realized, was a far cry from where I had been. That night, as I stood on my apartment balcony, looking out at the city lights, I felt a sense of contentment I hadn't experienced in years. Karen and her family had once dominated my life, their expectations and judgments shaping every decision I made. But now, they were just a chapter in my story, a chapter that had taught me valuable lessons about self-worth and resilience. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant learning from it, growing stronger because of it, and using those lessons to build a future that was truly mine. Months had passed since I walked away from Karen and the life we had built, or rather, the life I had sacrificed to maintain while she focused on appearances. In that time, I had discovered a sense of freedom and peace that felt almost foreign after years of living under the shadow of her family's expectations. This wasn't just a new chapter. It was an entirely new book. My days were no longer filled with the tension of trying to measure up to someone else's version of success. Instead, I woke up each morning with a sense of purpose that came from pursuing things that genuinely mattered to me. The apartment I had once considered a temporary refuge was now my sanctuary. I had filled it with pieces of myself, photos from my travels, mementos from new experiences, and the kind of cozy, lived-in charm that Karen would have deemed ordinary. For the first time, I felt like I was truly home. My career was thriving as well. Without the constant distractions and emotional drain of my marriage, I had thrown myself into my work, taking on ambitious projects that showcased my abilities. One particular project, a community development initiative I had spearheaded, earned me recognition from local leaders and opened doors to opportunities one hadn't dared dream of before. It wasn't just about professional success, though. It was about proving to myself that I was capable of greatness, regardless of what Karen or her family had thought of me. Then there was Clara. Our friendship had grown naturally over the months, evolving into something I hadn't expected but deeply appreciated. She had a way of seeing the world, and me, that felt refreshing and real. She didn't care about my past failures or the scars left by my marriage. To her, I was just Thomas, a man rediscovering himself, learning to laugh again, and finding joy in the simple things. One evening, as we walked along the waterfront, Clara turned to me and said, "You seem lighter these days. Happier." I smiled, feeling the truth of her words. I think I finally am. Karen had reached out a few more times since her final apology, but I never responded. It wasn't out of anger or bitterness. I had simply moved on. Forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation, and closure didn't require a conversation. I had given her enough of my time, my energy, and my heart. It was time to reserve those things for myself and the people who truly valued them. One afternoon, I found myself scrolling through an online article about Lisa's wedding fallout. The headline read, "The Rise and Fall of Social Media's Perfect Family." It was a thorough expose detailing the financial ruin, reputational damage, and personal struggles that had followed the wedding debacle. Karen's name was mentioned briefly, her image reduced to a footnote in her family's public implosion. I closed the tab, feeling no sense of schadenfreude, just a quiet relief that I was no longer part of their story. The true turning point came on a sunny Saturday morning. I was sitting on my balcony, sipping coffee and flipping through a travel magazine, when a thought struck me. I was free. Truly, completely free. I could go anywhere, do anything, and build a life that was entirely my own. That realization was both exhilarating and humbling. Over the next few weeks, I began planning a trip, a journey that would take me to places I had always dreamed of visiting but never prioritized. Clara, ever the adventurer, offered to join me for part of it, and I eagerly accepted. The trip felt symbolic, a physical representation of the emotional journey I had been on since leaving Karen. It wasn't about running away from the past. It was about embracing the future with open arms and an open heart. As I stood in the airport, boarding pass in hand, I glanced at my phone one last time. There were no messages from Karen, no lingering ties to the life I had left behind. I smiled, slipping the phone into my pocket and stepping onto the plane. The journey ahead was mine to define, filled with possibilities, growth, and the kind of happiness that comes from living authentically. Karen had once said I wasn't enough, but I knew better now. I was more than enough, and I didn't need anyone else to validate that. The world was waiting, and for the first time in a long time, so was I. I'd never been nervous meeting someone's parents until I met Islas. The walk from the valet to the entrance of Castellan felt like crossing a tightrope. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city lights beyond, their steady glow doing nothing to calm the storm in my chest. My suit jacket fit well. My tie was straight. I practiced my smile in the reflection of the glass door, willing warmth into my voice. Isla offered her hand and whispered, "You've got this." Her confidence should have steadied me, but as her father's car eased away, I realized it was her world I was about to enter, and I didn't even know the beginning of the rules. They led me to a private dining room reserved for high-stakes meetings and corporate negotiations. The mahogany table gleamed under soft pendant lights, glassware aligned like a row of sentinels. A waiter in a crisp tuxedo poured champagne into flutes that caught the light and refracted a promise of celebration, a promise I was already doubting. Across from me, Isla's parents sat as though sculpted from marble and silk. Roland Mercer's tailored suit fit like armor, his gaze measured, unflinching. Marianne, seated beside him, offered me a polite smile that didn't reach her tired eyes. I swallowed. My ring felt heavy in its box under my jacket pocket. We exchanged pleasantries, school, work, memories of how Isla and I met. Every answer felt rehearsed. I talked about my consulting firm's latest project, trying to sound successful enough but not threatening. Roland nodded once, curtly. He asked about my family, where they lived, what they did. I spoke about my parents' small business, how my sister taught kindergarten. I smiled as I spoke, recalling happy memories. But with every word, I sensed his amusement grow, like a wave gathering strength behind my back, ready to crash. The first course arrived, scallops nestled on a smear of cauliflower puree, delicate and white. I took one bite and forced another smile. The conversation shifted to future plans, children, house, traditions. I imagined talking about my dream home, a modest house I'd renovate for Isla. Instead, I feigned agreement and nibbled at artisan bread. The waiter topped up my glass. The champagne's sweetness turned sour on my tongue. Then came the joke. Roland leaned back, steepling his fingers. "So, Julian," he said, voice low and mocking, "what do you plan to do when the bank account runs dry? Or is that when you plan to bounce?" His words landed like stones, each syllable resonating across the table. He spoke as though he knew me better than I knew myself. My chest tightened. I glanced at Isla. She laughed. Not politely. Not that nervous chuckle I might have forgiven. It was a full-throated laugh that wrapped around his words and made them stick in my throat. Her eyes sparkled with amusement, as though I'd done something worthy of ridicule, as though I'd earned my place as the butt of a joke. My ring finger tingled. I could almost feel the weight of expectation shifting from my hand to the table. I took a breath, looked at the ring on her hand, and felt my reflection shatter. Time slowed. I saw the silver band catch the light, felt the hollow bloom of betrayal in my chest. My mind raced through every moment of our engagement. The night I surprised her on the rooftop with fairy lights, the way she pressed her cheek to mine as the skyline kissed the horizon, the promise we whispered to each other under stars. All those moments multiplied in that second, collapsing into a single, undeniable truth. This life wasn't ours. It belonged to a family that would never see me as more than an accessory. I stood up. The room hushed. The waiters froze. My chair scraped the floor, and I felt every eye turn to me. I didn't know what I would say, but the ring left my finger before words formed. I placed it beside her wine glass, its crimson liquid rippling, as though startled by my movement. I felt the cool metal slide across the table's surface and come to rest, a fragile emblem of everything undone. I looked at Isla one last time. Her smile faltered, confusion flickering across her features. There was fear there, maybe pity. I wondered if she realized in that moment how deep the cut went. But she didn't move to stop me. She didn't reach out. She only watched as I turned away. I walked out. No scene, no shouting. Just the soft click of my shoes on the marble floor, each step sounding a finale to a dream I'd once believed in. The door closed behind me, sealing the laughter and the luxury and the lie. Outside, the cool night air wrapped me like a cloak, bracing me for a silence I'd never known could feel so loud. Standing under the street lamp, I closed my eyes and let the city hum around me. The future lay ahead, unwritten, uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something stronger than fear, relief. The joke had ended everything I thought I wanted. Now, I could discover what I truly needed. I didn't go back to our condo that night. Instead, I checked into the Grand Meridian Hotel under a false name, carrying only a duffel bag and the hollow weight of betrayal. The lobby clock read midnight when I handed over my credit card, the clerk's practiced smile failing to reach his eyes as he asked for an ID I didn't have. Upstairs, I unlocked the door to room 712 and flicked on the overhead light, the brightness stabbing at my temples. I dropped my bag by the bed, kicked off my shoes, and sank into the plush mattress, staring at the ceiling as the shadows of the chandelier's crystal prisms danced above me like mocking specters. Sleep drifted in fragments. I dreamed of laughter, hollow, echoing laughter that grew louder with each replay. I saw Isla's face twisting into amusement at my expense, her eyes bright with derision. I felt my chest tighten as I tried to speak, but the joke was always on me, my voice swallowed by a tide of champagne and contempt. I woke gasping, cold sweat plastering my hair to my forehead. When I reached for my phone, the screen was streaked with fingerprints and dozens of missed notifications. Messages piled up in a digital avalanche, Isla asking if I was okay, her mother imploring me to forgive, friends feigning concern, each text an echo of the same question: what happened? They hadn't heard her father call me a gold digger or witnessed the ease with which she sold me out. They only saw the aftermath, the void I'd left in my place. I stared at her name blinking at the top of the screen and considered deleting everything. But I didn't. Instead, I switched the phone to Do Not Disturb, silence the world. Morning came too soon. I sat on the edge of the unmade bed, running my hands through my hair, willing the events of last night into unreality. A pot of lukewarm coffee sat on the bedside table. I took a shallow sip and grimaced. My stomach churned. I pulled the curtain aside and watched city traffic crawl below, cars inching forward like people moving through life. I felt like one of those cars, boxed in, waiting for permission to move. Eventually, I relented and propelled myself out of bed. I showered, letting hot water sluice away the residual sting of rejection, and dressed in fresh clothes I had thrown together at the last minute. I paused before leaving, staring at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my cheeks hollow. I looked like a man who'd lost more than a relationship. I looked like someone who had lost himself. The elevator ride down was silent except for the soft hum of machinery. On the street, I hailed a cab without looking back. I gave the driver the address of my favorite coffee shop, a no-frills place that felt like home. When I sat down at a window table, I ordered a double espresso and an everything bagel. The barista set my cup in front of me with a sympathetic smile. I nodded in gratitude, fingers tracing patterns on the ceramic before lifting it to my lips. The bitterness grounded me. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen. Theo, my best friend since college, the one person who'd seen me at my highest and my lowest without flinching. I let the call go to voicemail. A minute later, my phone buzzed again. A text from Martina Elwell, the CEO I'd been consulting for. Are we still on for this afternoon? No mention of anything else. That familiarity offered a bittersweet comfort. Work was the one place where I still had control. I glanced at my reflection in the window as I sipped my coffee, watching life pulse by on the sidewalk. A mother steadied her toddler, a businessman argued into his phone, a street musician coaxed mournful notes from a saxophone. The world continued as though nothing had happened, indifferent to the rupture in my life. I wished I could slip into that anonymity, become another face in the crowd, forget who I was supposed to be. But I couldn't, because I knew something that these strangers didn't. Their laughter didn't matter. Their judgments, their opinions, they held no power over me unless I gave it away. And in that moment, as the steam curled from my cup and the city roared outside, I decided I wouldn't. I retrieved my phone, scrolling through the voicemails and messages. Theo's frantic voice poured through the speaker. Julian, man, where are you? I've been calling you all night. Isla texted me, said you left. Look, if I was you, I'd call her back. I mean, she's your fiancée. His tone was tentative, afraid to push too hard. I listened without interrupting. When he finished, I chewed on my lower lip and typed a simple reply. Call me later. One by one, I cleared the rest. Martina confirming our meeting, old college buddies checking in, even a notification from my bank about an overdraft alert. I deleted half the emails in my inbox until I could breathe. Then I slid my phone into my pocket and stood. The world outside the cafe felt enormous, brimming with opportunities I'd never noticed before. I realized that for the first time in months, maybe years, I was standing on my own. Later that afternoon, I met Martina in her office. She looked up from her desk, concern flickering in her eyes as I shook her hand. Everything okay? She asked. I gave a curt nod. Fine. I sat down and outlined the next steps for our project, focusing on product launch timelines and revenue forecasts. She watched me with an unreadable expression, then nodded and took notes. Work was familiar. Calculators, spreadsheets, strategy. It didn't require me to be someone's prop or punching bag. It required competence, vision, and integrity. After the meeting, I walked back to the cafe, bought another espresso, and sent Theo a text. Meet me at the old park bench in an hour. He replied almost instantly, on my way. I sat outside, shoulders squared, breathing in the spring air. When Theo arrived, he flopped onto the bench next to me, eyes wide with questions. I handed him my coffee and said, I'm okay, man. Not great, but okay. He nodded, studying me like a wounded comrade. You want to talk about it? I stared at my cup, the late afternoon sun glinting off its rim. I'm not going back, I said. Not to her. Not to that life. It felt like a funeral, Theo. Like I was mourning the death of something I thought was love. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Then don't. I looked up at him and managed a small, genuine smile. No, I won't. As we sat there, the world carried on around us, cars honking, children laughing, life unfolding in riotous color. And I realized that while some endings felt like funerals, they were also beginnings. The echo after the door closed wasn't a dirge, it was an invitation. An invitation to step into a story of my own making. I took a sip of coffee, let its warmth spread through me, and stood, ready to answer the call. The morning sun filtered through the blinds in soft, forgiving slats, but I felt no warmth. Coffee sat cooling on the kitchen counter, its steam dissipating like my last hopes of reconciliation. I'd barely touched it when I heard a soft knock at the door, 3 deliberate taps that echoed too familiarly. My heart lurched, and I stood frozen, the mug clutched in my hand. Isla. After everything, she was here. I set the cup down with more force than intended and moved toward the door, each step heavy as if I were wading through water. Through the peephole, I saw her standing on the stoop, eyes rimmed red, hair slightly mussed around her face. She held a crumpled bouquet of daisies. Her favorite, wrapped in tissue paper. It was morning, but she'd come straight from home, not stopping to change or compose herself. My throat tightened. Part of me wanted to slam the door and leave her standing there. Part of me dreaded to see her pain. I opened the door without greeting. The hallway light spilled between us. She looked past me as though seeing something I could not, some memory I buried beneath anger. The daisies trembled in her hand. Her lips quivered. "Julian," she began. Her voice wavered like a song missing its chorus, familiar, but unsteady. "I'm so sorry." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, studying her. Her apology had the ring of rehearsed remorse. I'd heard it before during arguments that ended with a phone call and a promise to change. But this was different. I wasn't the same man who cared enough to listen. "Sorry isn't going to fix what happened," I said, voice low. Tears slipped down her cheeks, but she lifted her chin. "Last night." I shouldn't have laughed. "You're right. My father's words were cruel. You don't deserve that." I was scared of him, scared of what he'd say if I defended you. I froze. Her confession hung between us. I placed a hand over my heart, feeling its rapid thump. "You froze," I repeated. "You froze and chose silence." Silence that stung louder than any insult. She nodded, shoulders trembling. "I know. I wish I could take it back. I tried the second you walked out. I cried to my mom. I begged her to find you and tell you how much I love you." Her voice cracked, and she swallowed hard. But she wouldn't help. I shifted, the wood of the doorframe digging into my back. "Your mother," I echoed. "She sided with him?" Isla bit her lip. She said he was too proud to admit fault, that I needed to find the right moment, that it would pass. Her hand tightened around the daisies, petals crumpling. I waited. I thought if I waited long enough, you'd come back. If I could fix it myself, without pushing him too hard. Without pushing him, I finished, astonished at the logic. "You mean without risking his approval?" Her eyes burned with regret. "I never thought he'd hurt you like that. I believed I could contain him." I closed my eyes. I remembered her gentle laughter on other occasions, moments when she bent to kiss my forehead, when she traced the outlines of my dreams on napkins at pizza joints. I remembered believing in her, in us. But now I felt that world crack into splinters. Is that all I was? Something to contain, to manage, to negotiate. My voice shook despite my efforts to keep it steady. She shook her head vigorously. "No, you were always more than that." She took a shaky step forward. "You're everything I ever wanted." But in that moment, I was someone else, someone afraid of losing my family. I stared at her, weighing her words. Part of me wanted to believe her, to reach out and pull her in, to tell her I still loved her. Another part of me recoiled, sure that this was the moment she'd ask me to forgive and forget, to promise I'd dance to her father's tune forever. She swallowed and exhaled, steeling herself. "Julian, I came here to say that I'm done negotiating. I won't put you through that again. If you want me, it'll be on my terms. I'm choosing you." Her declaration hung in the morning air, fragile as dew. I wanted to lean in and brush her hair behind her ear. I wanted to tell her this was exactly the moment I'd been waiting for, proof that she valued me enough to risk it all. Instead, I felt the weight of every moment since that dinner settle in my chest. "I appreciate that," I said slowly, "but I need time. I need to know you'll stand up for me, even when I can't." She paused, uncertainty flickering across her face. "I will," she whispered. I stepped back, closing the door until it clicked. The daisies drooped against the wood. I could hear her footsteps retreat, a soft shuffle that carried more sorrow than I could bear. I rested my hand on the door for a moment, listening to her voice trail off down the hall like an echo I couldn't catch. Inside my apartment, the morning light felt cold and empty. I walked to the window and watched her disappear around the corner, the daisy's petals fading from view as though she'd never held them. My reflection shimmered on the glass. A man torn between love and self-respect, between the comfort of what once was and the uncertainty of what could be. I returned to the kitchen counter, where my coffee had gone cold hours ago. I picked up the cup and drained the last bitter drop. The taste lingered, reminding me that healing wasn't a choice. It was a process, slow, gradual, and undeniably my own. As the day wore on, I felt the momentum shift. My heart ached, but beneath the ache was a flicker of something new. agency. I wasn't merely reacting. I was choosing. I could let her back in, but on different terms, terms that respected my dignity. Or I could walk away, leaving behind the fragments of a future that had been shattered by laughter. The answer wasn't yet clear, but for the first time, I felt the weight lift just enough to see both paths. I closed my eyes and focused on the hum of the city below, letting it remind me that life moved forward, whether I followed or not. And in that sound, I heard the promise of possibilities waiting just beyond the door. 3 days after the conversation at my door, and 2 days after I'd sent those memories boxes off to storage, I settled into my home office's ergonomic chair, the afternoon sun slanting across my desk. I'd been easing back into routine. Emails, client calls, strategy sessions framed by whiteboards scribbled with timelines and key performance indicators. Work felt safe, predictable, until my phone buzzed with a message that made my heart freeze. It was from Martina Elwell, the CEO of Vantage Technologies. I tapped open the notification and read, "Can we talk? Urgent." A knot tightened in my stomach as I clicked to call. The line rang twice before her voice, usually bright with enthusiasm, sounded low and measured. "Julian," she began, hesitating. "I just got off the phone with a Mr. Draper from Mercer and Company. He said he's reviewing my records to verify your personal financials, specifically your investment history and liquidity." Her tone was flat, as though delivering news of a mild plumbing emergency rather than an assault on my reputation. "What?" I forced surprise into my voice, though I'd known this was coming. My mind flashed back to Roland's predatory smirk at that dinner table, the way he'd tested my confidence in front of his daughter's fiancé. "He actually called you?" "Twice," Martina confirmed, exhaling with irritation. "He claimed it's standard due diligence before I hire any consultant with access to our funding rounds. But something felt off. He wanted bank statements, copies of my proof of funds letters, even my personal credit score report." I pressed my fingertips to my temples, feeling blood pulse there. Roland Mercer's firm, the very institution that spat me out as a joke, was weaponizing corporate protocols to undermine me. "Thank you for telling me," I said, standing to pace the length of the room. My suit jacket hung neatly on a hook. I hadn't bothered to put it back on. I ran a hand through my hair and tried to steady my voice. "I agree," she replied, her quiet confidence a bomb. "But I need you to walk me through this. Help me articulate to my board why these checks are unnecessary and why I trust you." I swallowed the urge to unload my frustration, to rail against Roland's duplicity. Instead, I nodded to myself, imagining she could see the gesture through the phone. "I'll send you a succinct statement outlining my credentials and the reason these inquiries are irrelevant. And I'll forward any relevant documentation preemptively, bank statements, proof of funds, the whole portfolio summary. That should cut off their leverage." "Thank you," Martina said. "I appreciate your help. I'll copy you on any further requests." She hung up, leaving me staring at the blank video call tile on my screen. A slow anger bubbled up, anger at Roland for orchestrating this, at Isla for sending me a token of love while her father moved in the shadows. It wasn't just an attempt to humiliate me socially. Now he aimed to strip away my professional standing. I opened a new document titled Statement of Financial Integrity and began typing. I outlined my consulting fees, bank references, audited financial statements, even a notarized letter from my accountant. I cross-referenced each figure, ensuring every I was dotted and every T crossed. This was more than damage control. It was armor, proof that I belonged in boardrooms, not just at dinner tables. By early evening, I'd sent the package to Martina, along with a brief note. "I'm sorry you had to involve yourself in this, but I appreciate your willingness to stand by me. Let me know if there's anything else you need." Clicking send felt like firing a shot across Mercer and Company's bow. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the tension drain from my shoulders in waves. That night, I didn't call Isla. I felt too exhausted by the fight. Instead, I poured a glass of neat bourbon and settled on the balcony, the city skyline a patchwork of lights and darkened windows. The air carried a crisp breeze, rustling the leaves of a potted ficus I hadn't remembered to water recently. I sipped and stared out, tasting oak and smoke, thinking of the silence between us, the silence that cut deeper than her father's insults. The next morning, a letter arrived at my front door. The heavy envelope bore Isla's handwriting, elegant and precise. I paused before opening it, sensing a trap. When I finally broke the seal, Inside were 5 photographs from our trip to Tuscany, vineyards at sunset, a bronze statue in a hilltop piazza, 2 smiling faces clinking glasses of Chianti. Beneath the photos was a sheet of stationery in her handwriting, a long paragraph apologizing, pleading, promising that we can still make it work if you'll only meet me halfway. She wrote about our shared dreams. A house by the lake, Sunday morning breakfasts, one day, maybe children of our own. I held the letter at arm's length and felt something odd. No fluttering of affection, no pang of regret. Just a flat, cold certainty that I was reading an echo of the past, not an invitation to the future. I traced the edge of one photo, us under a cypress tree, golden light haloing our heads. The memory warmed my chest for a moment before dissolving like the sugar rim of that gelato I'd dribbled down my wrist. I laid the photos on the dining table and watched them lie there, beautiful, static fragments of a story I'd closed. I realized that while Roland had attacked my finances, Isla's silence during that battle had been the deeper betrayal. She had known he might attempt something. She had known how harmful it could be, and yet she had done nothing until her own comfort beckoned her back. Her words in the letter rang hollow compared to the weight of her father's actions. I gathered the photographs and stationery into an envelope and wrote a single line on the front, returned, no longer applicable. I didn't stamp it. I left it on my desk, a quiet monument to a chapter one refused to continue. That afternoon, I called Martina. Julian, she greeted me, concern laced with gratitude. They've received your documents and dropped the request. They said it was a clerical error. Good, I said, relief and vindication mingling in my chest. Thank you for standing up to them. She paused. I'm glad I did. But more importantly, I'm glad you did too. As I hung up, I felt a shift, a definitive hinge in the narrative of my life. It wasn't about winning or losing. It was about refusing to be silenced or diminished, whether by a wealthy father's whims or the love that wouldn't defend me. The threat in a suit had been neutralized, but the greater threat, my own willingness to stay, had already been vanquished. I poured another glass of bourbon and raised it to the setting sun, to independence, to self-respect, and to the next chapter, written by my own hand, free from the laughter that once ended everything. The morning I agreed to meet Marianne Mercer, I felt the weight of 1,000 unsaid questions pressing down on me. Her request had come in an email, so brief it felt almost brusque. Can we talk? I have something for you. I stared at her name on the screen longer than I cared to admit, then drafted a polite reply suggesting a downtown cafe at 11. When the time arrived, I walked into Ellington and Company on Maple Avenue, not the upscale venue where I'd once hoped to celebrate my engagement, but a modest bistro whose linen tablecloths and mismatched chairs hinted at genuine warmth. She was already there when I arrived, seated at a corner table beneath a painting of wildflowers. Marianne looked different up close. Her hair, once perfectly coiffed, fell in loose waves around her shoulders. Faint lines framed her eyes, not of age, but of years spent holding in truths she dared not speak. She rose as I approached and offered me a tentative smile, extending a hand I clasped gently. Her touch was cool, her knuckles slender and pale. Thank you for coming, she said, voice softer than I remembered. We sat, and a waiter promptly appeared with menus, but Marianne waved him away. I'm not hungry, she said, turning her gaze to the window. I nodded and waited for her to continue. She took a deep breath, as though bracing herself. I'm sorry for what Roland said, she began, her eyes unfocused. I'm sorry for what Isla did. Her words stumbled against the table's center, vulnerable and raw. I hadn't expected an apology from her, only from that formidable fortress of a man I'd once called my future father-in-law. It wasn't just my father, she said, folding her hands in front of her. It was all of us. We didn't see you. We saw our daughter, our legacy, and whatever we thought you represented. And none of us paused to consider how cruel that was to you. I studied her face, trying to find the Marianne I'd once known, the gentle laugh in her eyes, the way she'd compliment my cooking on our first holiday dinner, the brief warmth in her gaze when she believed I was the right match for her daughter. But beneath those memories lay a cavern of betrayal, silences, dismissals, and one devastating evening. I inhaled slowly. Thank you, I said. It was the only answer I could muster without shattering. Marianne reached into her handbag and withdrew a small, velvet-lined box. My heart picked up pace as she placed it between us. I hesitated before opening it, as though part of me feared another trap. But inside lay a silver ring set with a dark sapphire, its stone gleaming like a secret under the cafe's soft lights. "This was mine before I married into this family," she said, her fingers brushing the box's edge. "Your grandmother gave it to me on my 21st birthday. I wore it for years as a reminder of who I was before becoming Roland Mercer's wife." I lifted the ring, admiring its simple elegance, the smooth band, the deep blue stone that caught the light in shifting ripples. "It's beautiful," I murmured, feeling its weight in my palm. Marian smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I kept it hidden these last 30 years, afraid of what my in-laws would say if they knew. But after what happened at Castellan, I realized someone needed to give it new life, someone who understood self-worth." She paused, and I noticed how her shoulders drooped as though she had carried a burden too long. "Why me?" I asked, surprised by the lump in my throat. "Because," she said, her voice steady, "you refused to bargain away your dignity. You left that dinner rather than endure someone else's definition of your worth. I've spent my life conforming an obedient daughter, a dutiful wife, an unseen mother. But you stood up for yourself." I felt a swell of emotion, gratitude, pain, hope, intertwined in a knot I couldn't untangle. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it," she urged, leaning forward. "Not as a gift from me, but as a symbol of your own value. Let it remind you that you don't owe anyone your dignity." I slipped the ring onto my finger, surprised by how perfectly it fit. The sapphire's cool surface rested against my skin, a silent pledge that I could choose my own path. I looked up at Marianne, awed by the quiet courage in her eyes. "Thank you," I repeated, meaning every syllable. She exhaled, closing her eyes for a moment before opening them again with a clarity I had never seen in her. "You're welcome." "And Julian," she paused as though choosing her words carefully, "know that you deserve someone who values you without hesitation." I nodded, tasting the truth of her statement. For too long, I'd sought approval. First from my own doubts, then from a family that thrived on privilege. Now, with this ring, I claimed a new kind of approval, my own. We lingered at the table, talking quietly about my consulting work, or art projects, the small tragedies and triumphs that had filled her life. For the first time, I saw her not as Isla's mother or Roland's wife, but as Marianne, a woman who had reclaimed a piece of herself. The cafe's bustle faded around us until all I felt was the steady presence of her sincerity. When I left, the ring glinted on my hand like a beacon. Outside, the sun warmed my face as I walked down Maple Avenue. I paused, raising my hand to feel the sapphire catch the light. I thought of everything I had lost and everything I stood to gain. The weight of that ring reminded me that dignity was not negotiable, and self-worth was not a privilege to be bestowed. It was a right to be claimed. As Marianne's silhouette receded behind the cafe window, I took a deep breath and stepped forward. For the first time in months, I felt anchored, not to a promise made at a table beset by laughter, but to an unshakable conviction in my own worth. And with that certainty, I knew my story would continue on my terms, ring on finger, head held high. I stared at the stacks of cardboard boxes lining the living room, each one labeled in my neat handwriting: books, clothes, kitchen, memories. The condo felt cavernous now, its echo reminding me of every argument we'd ever had and every promise that had quietly unraveled. It had once been our sanctuary, but now each wall pressed in with the ghosts of conversations I no longer wanted to remember. I snapped the box closed and sealed it with tape, the rough strip catching on my fingertips as though reminding me of the cost of leaving. My hands trembled as I lifted the next box. Tuscany photos, our travel journals, the canvas print of the vineyard sunset we'd argued about hanging in the bedroom. I carried it to the foyer and stacked it neatly beside the front door. Each placement felt like a decision. This is where the past stays. Beyond this point lies a future I would build alone. The entire place smelled of cardboard and dust, like a library abandoned for too long. It felt good in a strange way, freeing, as though every packed item compressed the weight of old compromises. I paused in the hallway, listening to the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic below. My phone buzzed, a notification from Martina confirming her board meeting adjourned early after resolving that financial smear. I smiled at the small victory, then tucked the phone into my pocket and turned back to the boxes. There was no room for hesitation now. I moved methodically, pulling books from the shelves, sorting clothes in the closet, reclaiming the kitchen knives wrapped in bubble wrap. When I reached the bedroom, I found our bed stripped to the mattress, the headboard bare of the photographs we'd pinned there. I closed the curtains and gathered the sheets and pillows, bundling them into a sheet cover. The silk quilt we'd argued over, the one she said didn't match, went into the final box labeled linens. I took one last glance at the empty room and felt the hollow ache of loss, but also the thrill of opportunity. The buzzer rang. I hesitated, momentarily unsettled by the idea that someone might see me dismantling my life. Then I pressed the intercom. "It's me," I said. Theo's voice crackled through. "Need a hand?" I buzzed him in. A few minutes later, he appeared in the foyer, grin tentative and sympathetic. His presence was a tether to better days, a reminder that I hadn't done this alone. We hoisted boxes together, stacking them in his car with military precision. He cracked jokes to ease my tension. "Hey, don't label all your regrets miscellaneous," he teased, making me laugh despite myself. Even laughter felt unfamiliar now, but good. With each box loaded, the condo looked emptier, my reflection in the window growing smaller as the sun slipped lower in the sky. When the last box was secured in the trunk, I closed the door behind me and inhaled the thinner, freer air. Theo slung an arm around my shoulders. "You okay, man?" he asked. I brushed his hand away, smiling ruefully. "I will be." His nod was patient, understanding more than words could convey. I returned inside for a final sweep. The bare floors felt chilly under my shoes, the echoes louder than before. I walked through each room, touching the wall where our wedding photos had hung, stepping onto the floor we danced across on quiet Saturday mornings. I whispered a quiet farewell. To the life I once imagined, to the person I was when I thought that ring meant forever. At the front door, I paused and looked back one last time. The empty rooms held no threat now, only potential. I believed that once I ceased carrying these boxes of memory, I would feel lighter, ready to fill new spaces with different stories. I locked the door and slid the key under the mat, a gesture of finality and release. Theo was waiting by his car, engine idling, headlights off. I joined him in the passenger seat, the boxes of memories taking up most of the back. As we drove away, the condo vanished behind a curve, and I felt a profound quiet settle in my chest. It was the hush after closure, the pause before a new beginning. That night, I unpacked only one box in my temporary apartment, the one Marianne had given me. I set the silver sapphire ring on the nightstand, its dark stone catching the lamplight. I didn't need photographs or journals right now. I needed that reminder that dignity is something you carry with you, not something you leave behind. I lay on the mattress of an unfamiliar bedroom, listening to the hum of the city through the open window. The boxes, tucked away in storage, had condensed my past into neat containers. In their place, I felt the space to breathe, to choose, to become someone not defined by others' laughter or approval. And as sleep claimed me at last, I realized that sometimes the most honest packings are not of belongings, but of truths, untold, unbroken, finally unbound. A week after Marianne's gift, I sat at my desk going through client proposals when an alert popped up on my laptop, a credit report inquiry I didn't recognize. The header read Mercer and CO, in cold, capital letters. My stomach dropped. I clicked to view the details and saw multiple hard inquiries dated just 2 days ago, requests for my credit history, bank balances, even loan applications I'd never made. My pulse spiked. Roland had promised subtlety. This was outright sabotage. I closed my laptop, stood, and paced the length of my office. The sunlight streaming through the blinds felt too bright, too revealing. I needed proof. I dialed a mutual contact at First National Bank, a compliance officer I trusted. My voice was steady despite the tremor I felt inside. "Can you confirm whether Mercer and Company requested my statements?" I asked. There was a pause, then a polite sigh. "Yes, they did. We flagged it as unusual and denied the request pending your authorization." Relief and fury warred in my chest at once. They tried to slip under the radar, but banking regulations had caught them. I thanked my contact and hung up, marveling at the double edge of bureaucracy. It restrained me in my proposals, but also protected me from predatory tactics. That evening, I confronted Isla over coffee at Blackwell's. Her eyes widened when I slid my phone across the table, showing the inquiries. She glanced at the screen, then back at me, cheeks paling. "Julian, I swear I didn't know." Her voice trembled like a candle flame. I folded my arms, leaned forward, and stared into her eyes. "You didn't know? Or you chose not to tell me?" My heart pounded. I needed honesty, not more excuses. She looked away, swallowing hard. I asked Dad for help fixing things after that dinner. He said he'd handle it professionally. I didn't ask for details. Her words felt me like a punch. I closed my eyes, recalling the night at Castellan, the way her laughter had sliced through me. Now I realized her father never stopped cutting. She'd enlisted him again, thinking he could erase pain with corporate maneuvers. The coffee between us cooled. I drank it in a single swallow and set the cup down hard. "You involved him again," I said. "You weaponized my name." My voice was low, controlled, but each word hammered the table. She reached across, but I pulled back. "I'm done being collateral damage." Her hand hovered over mine, trembling. "Please, Julian." "I'm trying." I shook my head. "Trying isn't enough. Not when you let him test me like this." Her lips quivered. "I love you." She whispered it, but the words felt empty beneath the din of Mercer and Company's inquiries. I stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. She gasped. "I have work to do," I said, the lie slipping out. I needed time to think, time to rebuild without betrayals lurking in the background. I walked away, leaving her alone under the soft glow of the cafe lights. That night, I called my accountant and scheduled a full audit of my personal and business accounts. I hired a credit monitoring service, activated fraud alerts, and changed several passwords. Each protective measure felt affirming, a brick in the wall I was erecting around my life. As I clicked through security settings, I realized how often I had trusted others, trusted love, family, social niceties, to safeguard me. Now, I was the only guardian of my own integrity. In the days that followed, I buried myself in work, throwing myself into client deliverables with a fierce focus. I rebounded data analysis late into the night, drafted marketing plans at dawn, and negotiated contracts with newfound confidence. My phone no longer buzzed with pleas from Isla or her family. The silence was disconcerting at first, but gradually it felt like breathing room. One afternoon, I received an email from Mercer and Company. Their clerical error notice was brief. They regretted any inconvenience and confirmed no further requests would be made. I read the lines twice, then closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. The battle over my finances. I looked out the window at the cityscape, sunlight catching the glass facades of high-rises. I thought of all the times I'd compromised, tried to fit into molds not meant for me. The credit inquiries had been an affront, but they had also forced me to reclaim ownership of my story. I sipped my water and smiled, a slow, genuine curve. My name was on my credit report and on my terms. I was more than Mercer's weapon or Isla's project. I was Julian Mercer, no, Julian Morris, standing firm in my own worth. 2 months had passed, and in that time, I'd settled into a rhythm I hadn't known in years. My mornings began with coffee on the balcony, laptop open to project timelines and client updates. I'd taken to journaling again, filling pages with aspirations rather than anxieties. I'd even started attending a weekend pottery class, surprised at how soothing it was to knead clay into simple bowls, small creations I could hold, free from expectation. Life had regained its shape, defined by my choices rather than someone else's design. Then my phone buzzed, interrupting a Zoom call with Martina. I silenced the meeting, excusing myself to take the call privately. The display showed Isla's name. My chest tightened, a reflexive churn of anticipation and wariness. 2 months ago, I might have answered with hope. Now I answered with guarded calm. "Hello." No sobs this time. No frantic apologies. Just soft breathing on the other end, measured and steady. "Julian," she said. Her voice carried a confidence I hadn't heard before. No pleading tremor, no shaky preamble. "I need to tell you something." I closed my eyes and leaned against the wall, bracing myself. "Go ahead." She inhaled. "I've been seeing someone from the foundation, Matthew. He's working on the children's literacy project Dad sponsors. He's kind. He sees me. And maybe I was looking for someone to make me feel worthy without tests or jokes." Her tone was gentle, reflective, not designed to elicit pity. "I wanted you to hear it from me." I pictured her office at the foundation, rows of filing cabinets and narrow desks where papers spilled over. I pictured Matthew, someone careful and considerate, someone she'd chosen. A wave of relief washed through me, followed by a quiet pride. She'd moved forward. She'd found support elsewhere. "I'm glad you found someone who values you," I said, surprised at how easily the words came. "You deserve that." She paused. For a moment, I feared she might apologize again, but she didn't. Instead, she continued, "I called because I wanted to thank you." The words were so unexpected that I blinked. "Thank you for walking away. I see now that you showed me what it means to honor yourself. I needed that lesson." I closed my eyes and let her gratitude sink in. It felt strange to be thanked for a departure that had felt so final. "You're welcome," I said softly, I'm glad it helped. She chuckled, a low, warm sound. It did. And I hope you're happy. I glanced out the window at the dusty rose sky of early evening. I am, I replied. I had a home that felt like mine, a job I loved, friendships restored, and a ring from Marian that reminded me daily of my worth. I really am. Silence stretched across the line, comfortable now, like two old friends sharing a moment of quiet understanding. Finally, she spoke. I hope one day you find someone who sees your worth without a ledger. A smile tugged at my lips. I already have, I said, surprising both of us. I see it now. My heart hummed, steady and strong. I've learned to value myself first. Her breath caught. I'm proud of you, Julian. I felt a warmth expand through my chest that had nothing to do with nostalgia. Thank you, Isla. Goodbye. Goodbye, she echoed, softer this time. I ended the call and placed the phone on the table beside me. I let out a slow breath and closed my eyes, tasting the quiet triumph in the air. 2 months ago, her calm confidence would have been enough to upend me. Now, it felt like a benediction on a chapter already closed. I picked up my journal and wrote a single line. Closure is its own kind of gift. Then I turned the page and began sketching the outline of a new bowl I planned to shape in clay, a vessel meant to hold fresh water, not stale memories. That night, as dusk settled over the city, I stood on my balcony watching the lights awaken across the skyline. I slipped the silver sapphire ring, Marianne's gift, into my palm and traced its smooth band. It reminded me that the strongest bonds are the ones you forge with yourself, unbreakable because they spring from the truth of who you are. And in that gentle affirmation, I felt a softness bloom in my heart, a quiet celebration of endings that free you and beginnings born from resolve. The final conversation wasn't a farewell so much as a beginning, a promise that self-respect, once claimed, can lead you anywhere you choose. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, unassuming and plain, resting on the welcome mat like any other piece of mail. I carried it inside, expecting a bill or a solicitation, but when I turned it over and saw Marianne's elegant script, my chest tightened. I hadn't spoken to her since that morning at the cafe where she awarded me the silver ring, and in the weeks since, her presence had become a quiet beacon in my life. I sliced the envelope open and unfolded a sheet of tissue-wrapped canvas. Beneath the soft paper lay a small painting of a weathered dock stretching into a pale, rippling lake at sunset, colors of molten gold melting into lavender sky, reeds swaying in a gentle breeze, and a single wooden rowboat tied loosely to a post. I lifted the painting and held it against the wall opposite my desk, just high enough that the fading light of dusk would catch the water's surface. The scene felt familiar and foreign at once, not Tuscany vineyards or candlelit dinners, but something quieter, steadier, and infinitely more hopeful. I ran my fingers over the brushstrokes, imagining Marianne's hand guiding the paint, perhaps recalling evenings she once spent dreaming of her own future before it was shaped by someone else's design. In that moment, I realized she'd sent me more than a gift. She'd sent me a reminder of possibility, of calm conviction. Later that evening, I found myself lingering in the living room, the painting glowing softly under the lamp's warm beam. The bottles of bourbon and glasses on the coffee table seemed louder, the edges of the room sharper, but the dock drifted before my eyes like a promise of stillness. I poured myself a measure and settled into the armchair facing the canvas, glass in hand. It was strange how a single image could carry so much weight, a silent manifesto that spoke of departure and return, of courage and trust in one's own bearings. I realized, too, that this revolution, my departure from a life that nearly broke me, was not an eruption of anger but a quiet shift, like water finding a new course. That night, sleep came easily, and I dreamed of standing at the edge of that dock, toes grazing the cool wood, the surface of the lake reflecting an endless sky. I felt neither fear nor loss, only readiness to step forward, as though balance had been restored. In the morning, I made coffee and stood before the painting again, imagining I could smell the lake's mist and hear distant loons calling across the water. I fetched an empty frame from the spare closet and fitted the canvas inside, then carried it to the wall above my kitchen table, a place where meals would be shared, ideas hashed out, phone calls with friends and clients made. Over the next few days, the painting became part of my routine. When work emails piled up or a difficult client negotiation left me frazzled, I'd glance away from the screen and find solace in the dock's quiet invitation. On weekends, I took the painting down and carried it to my pottery class, sketching the scene on a slab of clay before molding its form into a shallow bowl. My hands remembered the gentle sway of the reeds as they shaped the rim, and I thought of Marianne's words. You don't owe anyone your dignity. Each coil of clay felt like an extension of that dock, a vessel built to hold only what I chose to put inside. One afternoon, the painting caught the light in a way that turned the lavender sky into deep violet. My sister called then, her voice bright and curious. "What's new with you?" she asked. I told her about the painting, about the pottery, about the feeling of waking each day unburdened. She laughed. Her laugh warm and genuine, as though she'd been waiting to hear that I'd found peace. I described how I'd hung the canvas above the kitchen table, how every meal now felt infused with purpose, how I'd started planning a weekend getaway to a lakeside cabin. "It's like you're rediscovering yourself," she said. I smiled, looking toward the painting, recognizing in that simple act of hanging a mirror for my soul. "I am," I said, "and it's exactly the reminder I needed." That evening, I invited Theo over for dinner. I cooked pasta with fresh tomatoes, garlic, and basil, the kind of meal that filled the house with laughter and stories instead of tension. As we ate, the painting watched over us, its muted colors a steady presence. Theo raised his glass. "To self-respect," he toasted, and I clinked my glass against his, feeling the echoes of my journey settle into steadier rhythms. Later, alone again in the soft lamplight, I traced the dock's edge with my gaze. What Marianne had given me was more than a painting. It was a living emblem of the quiet revolution I'd waged within myself. No grand proclamations, no dramatic battles, just the courage to step away, the grace to reclaim my worth, and the wisdom to hang a reminder in my home that sometimes the most profound transformations come in hushed strokes of color on canvas. And as I turned off the lights and the room softened into shadow, I knew I carried that dock within me, ready for any sunrise. 6 months had passed since I last walked away from the condo that had held promises I no longer believed in. In that time, I'd found a modest house on the edge of town, a fixer-upper with peeling paint and sagging floors, but with a view of the woods that felt like possibility. I'd spent weekends scraping wallpaper and repainting walls, measuring out tile for the kitchen backsplash, and coaxing life back into a garden that had languished under neglect. Everything I touched bore my fingerprints and my intention, from the freshly stained deck to the new light fixture in the hallway. Each improvement felt like a declaration. This house was mine, built on my terms. On a crisp autumn morning, I stepped onto that deck with a mug of black coffee in hand, the steam mingling with the cool air as I gazed at the golden light filtering through the treetops. I slipped the silver sapphire ring over my head and onto my finger, feeling the cool weight of the stones settle into place. Marianne's gift lay against my chest now, hidden beneath my shirt but never far from my thoughts. It reminded me that dignity wasn't something granted by others but claimed by myself. I ran a thumb over the dark stone and thought of all that had led me here, the laughter that ruptured my engagement, the financial attacks, the silences and apologies, and the small revolutions that had redefined my worth. Pulling my coat tighter around me, I imagined the day I'd leave this house to someone else, if that ever happened, and wondered if they'd feel the echo of my determination in the walls. But for now, it belonged to me, and I intended to live into that ownership fully. I stepped back inside, the wooden plank floor groaning beneath my boots, and made my way to the window overlooking the living room. There, above the mantel, I'd placed Marianne's painting of the dock at sunset, a testament to quiet resilience. Beneath it sat a flask of bourbon, a stack of books on business strategy and personal growth, and a small potted fern I'd named Grace. The room felt both lived in and hopeful, balanced between function and comfort. That afternoon, I found myself downtown running errands for the renovation, picking up oak planks for the new staircase railing, choosing weather-resistant exterior stain, and selecting a muted green for the front door. At each stop, shopkeepers greeted me by name, asking how the project was coming along. I felt the pleasure of community support, a contrast to the evening at Castellan where I'd felt so acutely alone. As I loaded the last of the supplies into my truck, my phone buzzed with a message, "Housewarming next month?" From Martina. I smiled, typing back, "Count me in." Moments later, a text from Theo, "Bring that bourbon." I grinned at the perfect coordination of friends and celebrated independence. Back at the house, I emptied the truck into the garage and carried boxes of tools inside. I paused at the threshold of the master bedroom, now painted a pale charcoal that caught the light in subtle whispers. I'd laid down new hardwood floors here last week, their surfaces gleaming under the ceiling fan's display of movement. I walked to the center of the room and turned in slow circles, imagining a bed where only one person slept, a desk where I'd write future proposals and stories, and a corner where I'd set up a small record player to fill the space with music I chose. I inhaled the scent of fresh paint and pine, feeling grounded in the reality of my own creation. In the evening, I sat at the dining table, an old farmhouse piece I'd refinished myself, with blueprints spread before me. The table's turned legs and rustic surface complemented the sapphire ring, its blue depth a steady point of focus as I sketched out the layout for built-in bookshelves. With each pencil stroke, I felt the convergence of vision and action. This was no longer merely about moving on. It was about constructing a life that reflected every lesson I'd earned: self-respect, resilience, and authenticity. Later, when the house was quiet, I settled into the armchair in the living room, the dock painting glowing softly in the lamp's light. I uncapped my bourbon flask and poured a measure into a glass, the amber liquid sloshing gently as I turned it in my hand. I let the warmth spread through me as I took a slow sip, savoring the burn and the comfort of solitude well-earned. I closed my eyes and heard the echo of the waves on that painted dock, a sound that no longer frightened me but invited reflection. Across the room, an unopened letter lay on the coffee table, its envelope bearing Isla's handwriting. I glanced at it and felt no compulsion to open it. I recognized it for what it was, another attempt to re-enter a story I had already rewritten. I rose and retrieved the envelope, then placed it in the recycling bin by the fireplace. There it would belong, among the cast-offs of a past version of myself. On the mantel, next to the painting, I had placed a new object. An antique compass I'd found at a roadside flea market. Its brass casing was scratched, its glass face slightly cloudy, but the needle still quivered northward with unwavering certainty. I had thought it simply a symbol of direction, but now I saw it as a testament to staying true to oneself. I picked it up and held it against Marianne's painting, aligning the compass's arrow with the dock's perspective, as though both pointed toward the same horizon of self-determination. That night, sleep found me easily in the renovated master bedroom. I fell into dreams without the rush of panic or doubt, instead spinning stories of distant travels and new beginnings. I remembered how lost I once felt, adrift in a sea of expectations, tethered by others' definitions of value. Now, I felt anchored in my own identity, guided by the ring's sapphire glow and the compass's unwavering needle. When morning arrived, light filtered through the new curtains I'd installed, dust motes dancing in the beams. I remembered a conversation with Martina about fear of complacency. "Don't mistake comfort for stagnation," she'd said. "Growth happens when you know who you are and still choose to become more." I took a deep breath and stood, ringing the crystal tumbler on the nightstand to awaken my senses. I slipped the compass into my jacket pocket and the ring settled on my finger like a promise. I walked downstairs to the kitchen, where Grace the fern thrived on the windowsill, and poured a fresh cup of coffee. I thought of the housewarming party next month, of friends filling this space with laughter and conversation, each person a testament to the life I'd cultivated. I thought of Marianne's kindness, of Theo's steadfast loyalty, of Martina's partnership, and of the person I'd become, a man who understood that the greatest value one could hold was not inheritance or lineage, but the integrity of one's own heart. Raising the mug to my lips, I whispered to the empty room, "Here's to self-worth," unapologetically claimed. And in that moment, bathed in morning light and quiet resolve, I realized I had indeed found someone who saw my worth without a ledger, myself.